So I'm going to start this speech with something you already know, which is a horrible way to start a TED Talk, but whatever, stick with me. People suck at keeping promises. Like, they're really, really bad at it. And you might think, okay, well, he's a little bit cynical, but let me be a little bit more empirical with this thought, quantitative. Let's take a couple of different types of promises in our culture that we're not that great at. Right? What's one common promise that we often make, one commitment every year? Well, the New Year's resolution, right? 40% of Americans make the New Year's resolution every year. And of this population, what percentage actually fulfills that commitment? Well, according to the Journal of Clinical Psychology from the University of Scranton, it's about 8%. 8 out of 100. Okay, so that's a common promise, but let's think of something a little bit more serious. A deep, deep promise that we have in life. Marriage, right? It's a huge commitment. You're literally committing the rest of your life to another individual. But if you look at the statistics behind it, about 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. And I'm not trying to be critical of other people. It's just a statistic, right? Now let's look at one final other area of promises, maybe an industry that is known for its promises, a factory of promises, right? Politics, politicians, constantly making promises. Well, if we look at the statistics behind that, PolitiFacts.com, Pulitzer Prize-winning website, looking at the promises made, kept, and broken for politicians. Well, look at GOP leaders. Right now, they're at about 38% of fulfilling their promises, and I'm not trying to give Obama an out. He's only at 45%. So we look at these three iconic cultural areas of promises, and we're not really doing that well. But you see, that's something you kind of already know intuitively, so that's not very interesting. What is interesting? Well, I think a more interesting question would be, why? Why are people so bad at keeping their promises? My name is Alex Sheen, and I am the founder of Because I Said I Would, a social movement and nonprofit organization dedicated to the betterment of humanity through promises made and kept. With supporters in over 150 different countries, I have seen a wide gambit of promises, and I study them, try to understand them and how they better this world. And I think when we look at that question, why do people suck at keeping their promises? There's a number that you might want to think about. It's 15,942. 15,942. This is the average number of words a person speaks in a given day. That's a lot. Now, this study was done by the University of Arizona, and it was done only on college students, so you could say the demographics are skewed slightly, but you get the point, right? There's a lot of words being said here. And with all those words that we're saying each and every day, how many of them are forward-looking, about the future? How many times in a day do you say, or do you hear someone say something like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Oh, I'm going to be there. Yeah, I'll show up. Oh, I promise, always, never. Oh, tomorrow. It's a lot. It's a huge number. And that number can be a problem. But the number alone, that's not the issue. There's something greater here at play. It's our memory. We have a terrible, terrible memory. A lot of people don't admit to this, and they don't think we do, because memories, they feel so real, but they're also constructed, meaning that we build memories. They're not always factually true. So let's think about how fallible and how horrible our memories are. Well, one of the memories that people often say are the most accurate are what are commonly referred to as flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories are all those memories that happened in some very specific emotional period of time, right? It's those memories where it's like, I knew where I was on that day when that thing happened, right? And we say that these are the most accurate. That's how we feel at the very least. But what do studies show? Well, let's look at one of those flashbulb memory moments. When the Challenger spacecraft, when it exploded. For those who are adults at this time, this is something that we say we remember very deeply, exactly when it happened, where we were. In this tragedy, a crew of 6 and a high school teacher would die 74 seconds after liftoff. A study was done about memory at this time with about 106 students. Immediately after this incident, they were asked questions about where they were, what they were doing, things that are basic details that you would think you would remember in this flashbulb memory moment. 2.5 years later, those students were asked again those same questions to see how accurate their memory was in this emotional moment that we're supposed to have a reliable memory for. What percentage of them scored 0 out of 7 in the basic details of this questionnaire, of this interview? 25% of people couldn't remember a single thing, technically. And of people who could at least get 2 out of the 7 questions right, 50%. Only 50% of them could even get 2 of those questions right. The truth is, human memory is horrible. And now you might say, oh, well, he's just picking out one study. Well, they've done this with 9/11 also and other types of memory studies. But let me ask you right now a specific question that might show how faulty our memory is. Can you tell me what a nickel looks like? Can you tell me what a nickel looks like? Which way is the face pointing? Where is the year placed on it? What's on the back? How many windows are on the building? Is there even a building on the back of a nickel? You see, how many times have you seen a nickel? So many times. But we can't remember these things because we're just, quite honestly, not very good with details. And this actually affects how we think of promises. I mean, how many times have you been in a conversation, or I should say an argument with somebody, where you're like, I wish there was a camera plan because if there was, you would have heard I said I'll be there at 3 o'clock. No, you said you'd be there at 3:30. And you both swear it's the truth. And it's not that either one of you are lying. We just have a horrible memory. But that isn't the only problem. Memory isn't the only problem. And the number of words, that's not the only problem. Sometimes it's even word choice. The words we use to describe our promises, that statement of a promise, sometimes the promise is broken at the very mention of that combination of words. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes our promises are so epic. They're almost too big, right? Almost unattainable in the way that we say them. And I think that we get a lot of that from movies. I mean, think of every movie you've ever watched, every book you've ever read. At the core of the story is a commitment, a promise made, broke, or kept. You know, it's there. And I think that starts to rub off on us, that our promises have to be so epic and movie-like sounding, right? You know, we're on the top of the mountain holding Simba and, you know, the drums are playing and that's what we think promises have to be, this big epic thing. So we make them so big that they're almost unattainable. Well, life isn't a movie. And sometimes we need to be more particular with that word choice. Let me give you an example. I was giving a speech at a college. It wraps up. It's about the importance of a promise. And afterwards, college student comes up to me. And this girl with all this passion says, I know exactly what my promise is. I know exactly what it's going to be. I am going to win the Division III national championship because I said I would. And she says it that passionately. But then I stop her. I say, think about that. Actually, I'm actually sorry to even say this to you, but that is not a promise. Can you really promise that? The truth is, something like a national championship, there's so many external factors at play, right? Maybe the ref has a bad call. Maybe your best player rolls an ankle, can't play. You can't promise that because the definition of a promise is a statement telling someone you will definitely do something or something will certainly happen in the future. With all these external circumstances, how could you promise something will certainly happen? You can't. Because what she said to me was actually a goal. And there's a difference between a promise and a goal. Sometimes we confuse the two. You see, a promise, well, she could make a promise of learning all of the plays, studying the playbook. She could make a promise to show up to practice every day and on time. She could make a promise not to have unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. You can make those types of promises, and the truth is, it's the everyday promises, those little things we can control, that lead us to our goals. But sometimes we don't have the right word choice, and we need to think about that a little bit more. So let's say you are a computer, and you have the perfect memory, and then you think about your word choice very deeply. There's still another problem here. It's just simple motivation loss. It's kind of weird when you think about the timeline of a promise and the emotions that we have, because it goes up and down, right? And I kind of have this thought that I've been thinking about. I call it the two people theory, okay? Now I want to put a little asterisk on this because it's not really a theory, it's a hypothesis. But theory sounds better for a TED Talk, right? It makes me sound smarter. In fact, we're going to call it the two people theorem. That's even a little more punch to it, right? The two people theorem. What is this? It's the thought that we really almost look like two different people at different points in a promise. What do I mean by that? Well, in the beginning, you're so passionate about this promise. You're going to be there for someone that needs you, okay? You're going to do what is right and stay committed. That's in the beginning. And then what, right? That emotion completely fades. It's like we are two entirely different people. If you could step away from the situation and just watch it play out, it's like you're crazy. It's weird. And, you know, one person wants to make this promise, the other one doesn't want to show up. Two entirely different people. Now, if we understand that a little bit, that's a good thing, but how do we actually get better then? Well, I like analogies a lot. I like to think through problems with analogies, so I'm going to make an analogy right now, a scenario, okay? Let's say right now, pumping through these air vents, I've pumped in a virus, right? A virus that turns you into a zombie, okay? Turns you into a zombie just like you think a classic zombie is, right? You're insatiable for blood, you're going to attack people randomly, really bad stuff, right? In 24 hours, I tell you, from this moment, you're going to become a zombie, okay? But then I tell you, 24 hours after that, 24 hours after that, you are going to become normal again. All the effects will be reversed, and you'll be exactly who you are right now. So 24 hours from now, you become a zombie. 24 hours after that, you're back to normal. What would you do in that scenario? Realistically, think for a second, what would you do? Well, I ask a lot of people this question, just anecdotally, and I feel like we all kind of say the same thing. People say, you know what? I go home. I would tell everyone I love, go, leave, do not come around here. I want to save you. I want to protect you from who I'm about to become. Those people leave, and then what's the next step? You probably chain yourself up, right? Make sure that you don't hurt yourself. You don't hurt random strangers, right? You chain yourself to prevent that. What you're doing in this scenario is that you are forecasting your own weakness, and then you are taking preventative actions, actions to prevent yourself from hurting others. Forecasting your weakness, taking actions so that when you become that second person, you don't hurt other people. Well, why don't we do this in real life? You're telling me we don't become two different people? Because if we make the promise and we break it, doesn't that break someone's heart? Someone that you love? Doesn't that hurt? So I think we need to build these chains. But this is a fictitious example. Zombies, right? That doesn't make any sense. What do we do in real life if we want to do this, to make these artificial chains? Well, I think one of the things you could do is you could write out that promise and you could share it through social media. Because think about that. We have all this emotion right now, but when we get into that weak spot, maybe sharing it with 500, 1,000 people will keep you to your promise. Because the truth is, we're a little egotistical, right? We're not about to let that many people down and make a fool of ourselves. Even in our weakest moments, we're not willing to do that. So this is just one example, but we got to really think about forecasting our weakness and making some change. And so in this example of this zombie, you know, you go home, you tell everybody, and then you chain yourself up. There's a timeline. Really what we're doing in this scenario is making a plan. You've made a plan to protect people from being hurt from a broken commitment. But we don't very often do this when it comes to promise. Usually it just comes out of our mouth. Even my own, of course. You know, you just say, oh yeah, I'll do that. We don't really plan. Humans actually have a very horrible perception of time. How much time it takes to do the 4 steps in sequence to fulfill a commitment. We just say, yeah, I'll do that. We don't think about the time. In fact, we have a phrase that I hear all the time, and it's almost like a motivational poster. You need to make time for what's important in life. You need to make time for what's important in life. I hate this phrase. You're going to make the time. Time cannot be made. Time cannot be made. It can only be reserved. It can only be marked, right? You can only adjust for your day and take all the little steps that it takes to fulfill your promise. You can only reserve time for that. But not many people do that. Not many people take their schedule and put each little step in a promise on it to ensure that they are following a sequence that hits a certain date to fulfill a promise. They don't do that. We just normally just say that, and that's a problem. If you want to be good with your promises, then you got to think through some of these problems of why we suck at keeping promises. To get better with your promises, be careful with your word choice. We say over 15,000 words in a day. Be careful with your word choice and remember to write those important promises down. Because I assure you, you will forget what you actually committed to. And then you don't want to get in this argument with another person. Just write it down. Also create motivators that chain you to your promise. So when you're at your weakest moment, you still know you can do what is right and create a plan. Don't just let it go to fate. Put steps into place and put those steps in your calendar so you follow them in sequence and you can fulfill your promise. Because that's what we need in this world. People who are reliable, who fulfill their promises. The challenges that we face, they are great. Humanity faces these challenges and you see them on the news. This pain and this suffering. And sometimes the adversity is so great that we start to think that the only thing that will solve it is a miracle solution. Yeah, we just need $1 billion of funding. We need to change the laws, right? We need a new technology to be developed or a miracle cure. A miracle, that's what we need. Well, sometimes we don't need a miracle. Sometimes we just need people to do what they said they were going to do in the first place. To be there for your friends and your family. To fight for a cause through thick and thin. The promises that we make this world. Thank you.